I remember that day as if it were yesterday. The rain was falling so hard that the sound on the windshield sounded like a series of heartbeats. I was late, nervous, and all I wanted was to get home quickly. Little did I know that, within a few hours, that very day would completely change the course of my life, and my soul. The traffic light was red. That's when I saw him for the first time. A man standing on the sidewalk, soaking wet, with a piece of cardboard covering his head. He approached slowly, with a look that mixed humility and a strange peace, as if nothing in the world could hurt him any more. But I didn't want to look. I was too angry to see the good in anyone. "Ma'am, your tire's flat," he said hoarsely. And without even thinking, I responded coldly, almost cruelly. "I don't need any help, thank you." He walked away, head down. I remember the drops running down his gray beard. I remember, and I still feel ashamed. At that moment, my daughter Emily, who was in the passenger seat, looked at me and said something I've never forgotten. "Mom, sometimes God tests our hearts in ways we don't understand." I just rolled my eyes, turned on the wipers, and went on my way. Little did I know that that man, the one I had despised, would be the angel God would place in my path to save what I loved most in this world. It was early spring, but the sky felt like winter. I could still smell the wet earth rising from the streets, that aroma that always brought back memories of my childhood in Texas, when my father taught me to drive his old pickup truck. That morning, everything seemed ordinary, but there was something in the air, a kind of stillness before the storm, that I only noticed later. I was in a hurry. I always have been. My whole life, I'd been chasing everything. Schedules, deadlines, goals, bills. Too rushed to notice the signs, the pauses, the people. That man at the traffic light was yet another reflection of what I didn't want to see: pain, need, weakness. I couldn't bear to look at it because it reminded me of how afraid I was of losing control. Before I continue, I want to say that I ask God to bless you with all His infinite love, giving you much health, peace, joy, and faith, for we can never lose faith in God, for He will never abandon us, for His love is eternal and infinite. I also take this opportunity to ask that you like the video and subscribe to the channel. This helps me a lot, thank you. I continued the journey, pretending nothing had happened. Emily, always more sensitive, remained silent for a few minutes. She stared out the window as if carrying a heavy thought, and I pretended not to notice. In the back seat, my grandchildren, Oliver and Grace, sang a children's song, completely oblivious to the tense atmosphere inside the car. A few miles later, the rain thickened. The road's lanes began to disappear beneath the puddles, and the wind pushed the car as if trying to stop me. But I didn't stop. I never stopped. Pride is a dangerous road, and that morning, that was exactly the one I was driving on. The radio was on, playing an old Patsy Cline song, and the melody seemed to bring me a false sense of calm. Emily fiddled with her cell phone, while I tried not to show how much the steering wheel was beginning to shake. That's when I saw the sign for the old bridge. An old memory flashed through me. My father always said that bridge was the tired old lady, and that one day it wouldn't hold up to anyone anymore. But I didn't want to think about it. I thought it was an exaggeration. After all, how many times had I crossed that bridge without a problem? It was just another crossing. But fate never repeats anything in vain. It teaches, even when we refuse to learn. The wind picked up. Trees bent at the sides of the road. For a moment, fog enveloped everything. And it was at that moment that I felt a slight jolt in the car, as if something had come loose. I looked at the dashboard. Nothing. I looked in the rearview mirror. No one. I kept going. Fear sometimes disguises itself as stubbornness. Emily noticed. "Mom, maybe we should stop and wait for the rain to pass," she said. I smiled, a little forced. "It'll be okay. It won't be long now." But deep down, a voice whispered, "You should have listened." The bridge loomed ahead, immense and shadowy, its planks creaking under the weight of the water rushing over its sides. The lights flickered as if the sky itself were debating whether to lighten or extinguish completely. I slowed down but continued on. Oliver asked, "Grandma, why is the bridge making that noise?" I said it was just the wind. A lie. It was fear trying to make itself heard. Emily held his hand, while I gripped the steering wheel tightly and feigned a courage I no longer felt. Suddenly, a horn cut through the sound of the rain. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw headlights coming too fast. A truck. My heart raced. There was no shoulder, no space. Just the bridge, the river, and the storm. I tried to accelerate, but the car spun. The truck swerved, as if the driver had lost control. Emily screamed my name, the children cried, and time seemed to stand still. I felt the impact. It wasn't strong enough to destroy the car, but enough to push us against the bridge's guardrail. The cracking sound was the last thing I heard before the car lurched forward. The world turned upside down, and the cold of the water cut through me like a blade. Everything went dark. For a few seconds, I thought it was the end. But as the car sank, something inside me still screamed, not for myself, but for them. My grandchildren. My daughter. I couldn't leave them. I had to fight. And it was there, between the roar of the water and the silence of despair, that a memory came to me, that look in the man's eyes at the traffic light. Compassionate. I didn't know why, but something told me the story wasn't over yet. The car continued to descend, and the air was starting to run out. I tried to unbuckle my seatbelt, tried to reach Emily, but the window wouldn't budge. The sound of bubbles mingled with my thoughts. Would God hear me, even after I'd ignored one of his children that morning? That's when a strange noise echoed from outside the car. A loud, metallic sound, like someone was tapping on the glass. I couldn't see clearly, but I swear I recognized that shadow. It was impossible, or maybe it wasn't. What no one knew was that outside, in the icy waters of that river, someone was diving again and again, and he wouldn't give up as long as we all were breathing. Darkness swallowed everything around me. It was as if time had stopped between the moment the car crashed and the moment I felt the icy water rise up to my neck. The pain was real. So was the panic. But what truly paralyzed me was guilt. I wondered, how many times had I crossed that bridge believing I was in control, when in fact, I never was. Water seeped through the cracks, cold as needles piercing the skin. Emily struggled to unbuckle her seatbelt as the children screamed. The sound was muffled, distorted, almost as if it were coming from another world. My eyes burned. I tried to see something outside, any light, any sign of hope. But all I saw was the distorted reflection of the truck's headlight, blinking on the riverbed. For a moment, I felt like giving up. The human mind, when gripped by despair, creates voices, and mine told me it was too late. But another voice, soft and ancient, whispered within me, "It's not over yet." It was the voice of faith. Small, but firm. The same faith I had been ignoring for years, hiding behind a routine of haste and pride. I reached out, trying to reach Emily. Our fingers touched for a second, long enough to feel how much she was trembling. "Mom, I love you," she said, and the words echoed inside my head like silent thunder. I couldn't respond. I just prayed. The car continued to sink, tilting ever lower. Oliver cried loudly, calling for me. Grace sobbed, her eyes wide with fear. I tried to remain calm, telling her everything would be okay, even though I couldn't believe it. It's strange how, even at the end of her rope, a mother tries to protect her children from the truth. Suddenly, a strange noise emerged. A sharp, metallic sound, like a blow against glass. Again. And again. I looked outside, and there it was, a human shadow struggling against the current. My heart raced. Was it a rescuer? A miracle? I couldn't see clearly, but something about the movement was familiar. Emily saw it too. "Mom, someone's out there," she screamed. I didn't answer. Shock, fear, disbelief, all mixed together. That figure seemed to know exactly what it was doing. It was striking the side window with a heavy object, maybe a rock. And then, with a final impact, the glass cracked. The water rushed in with force, sweeping everything away. I swallowed a little, coughed, but still managed to grab Grace's hand. It was then that I saw the face. Even through the distortion of the water and the moon's reflection, I recognized it. It was him. The man from the traffic light. My entire body shivered. I couldn't tell if it was the cold or the shame. Henry dove in again and again, pulling the children out first. His instinct was to save them, even those who had despised him. It cut me deeper than the river ice. He pulled Oliver first, bringing him to the surface. Then he returned for Grace. Emily tried to undo her belt, but the clasp stuck. "Go, Mom! Get out!" she screamed. I couldn't leave her. I banged on the glass, tried to push it away, but the force of the water stopped me. Everything was spinning. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. Henry reappeared, panting, holding a piece of rusty iron. With strength only God could have given, he shattered the glass on her side. Emily came out, but hit her head on the frame. I managed to catch her before she passed out completely. He came back again, this time for me. I'll never forget the look in his eyes. There was no anger, no disapproval. Only compassion. As if he knew forgiveness is stronger than any words. I felt his firm hands pulling me, and for a brief moment, I thought we wouldn't make it. But somehow we did. When I emerged, the air felt like a blessing. The rain still fell, the wind still roared, but none of it mattered. I saw my grandchildren on the shore, shivering but alive. Emily was coughing but breathing. And Henry was still in the water, heading back to the car for the 4th time. "Henry, get out of there!" I yelled, but he didn't hear. The current was strong, and he struggled to open the back door. That's when I heard the snap. A sound that made me freeze with fear. The car's frame gave way, and he disappeared for a second. All I could do was pray. I clasped my hands together, trembling, and whispered, "Lord, please don't take from him the life he just gave us back." Emily hugged me, and we both cried. Seconds later, a shadow emerged. Henry was coughing, spitting water, exhausted but alive. He crawled to the bank, lay down in the mud, and looked up at the sky as if silently giving thanks. I approached, knelt beside him, and for the first time in years, said the words I so desperately needed, "Forgive me." He turned his face slowly, and even with his lips trembling, he whispered, "God has already forgiven you, Margaret. He just wanted you to see." Those words pierced my chest. I wept. Not for myself, but for what I had become. Proud, blind, cold. That night, on the riverbank, I understood that God speaks even through the most turbulent waters, and sometimes sends his angels disguised as beggars. But what I didn't yet know was that this man was hiding an even deeper story. One that would explain not only his reason for being there, but the purpose of everything that had happened. And it was in this mixture of faith, repentance, and gratitude that the true miracle began to reveal itself. I returned to that bridge many months later. The sun was shining, the wind was gentle, and the river seemed different, calm, almost serene. But inside me, the echo of that night still lingered, the sound of metal breaking, Emily's scream, Henry's gaze. It's funny how places hold memories, even when life tries to move on. That morning, the fire department had cordoned off part of the structure. They called it the Old Miracle Bridge, because, according to witnesses, no one believed anyone could survive that fall. The remaining planks were warped, worn, and full of cracks. I touched one of them and felt the cold wood as if it still remembered our pain. Emily was beside me, stronger now, but with a different outlook. Since the accident, she'd spoken less and prayed more. The boys had changed, too. Oliver always asks about the boy from the river. Grace still has nightmares, but every night she prays the Lord's Prayer before bed. Faith, somehow, has been reborn in all of us. I closed my eyes and remembered every detail. The car sliding, the sound of the horn, the glass breaking, and, above all, the image of Henry diving without hesitation. Sometimes I think it was there, in the midst of that chaos, that God gave me a new chance, not just to live, but to understand what true love is. The bridge was now a symbol. Townspeople came to take pictures, light candles, and leave flowers. Some said the river was blessed. Others said Henry was an angel sent. I knew the truth. He was just a good man, forgotten by the world but remembered by God. A local reporter showed up and wanted to interview Henry. He declined. He said he hadn't done anything extraordinary, that he'd just followed his heart. "We don't choose when God will use us. We just need to be ready when he calls," he said with that serene smile. Those words stuck with me. Because, until that day, I had never thought God could use someone like me, so imperfect, so full of flaws. But he used Henry to show me that pride destroys more than any accident. And that humility, sometimes, is born from tragedy. It was around this time that I began visiting the city every week. I brought soup and blankets and sat down to listen to the stories of the homeless. Some had lost everything. Others had been forgotten by their families. But there was something in them I hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. One afternoon, I found Henry again, sitting under a tree near the bridge. He was reading an old Bible with worn edges. I approached slowly. He looked at me and smiled, as if he'd been waiting for me. "Come back to say thank you again," he joked. I laughed, a little awkwardly, and sat down next to him. "No. I came back to learn," I replied. And he closed the book, looked at the horizon, and said, "So listen. The bridge didn't fall by accident, Margaret. Sometimes, God needs to break the ground we walk on to make us look to the sky." That sentence sent shivers down my spine. It was the purest truth. 4 years, I'd leaned on my certainties, my comfort, my possessions. And when the bridge collapsed, so did the woman I was. In her place, someone new was born, broken, but free. From then on, I began helping Henry on his walks. He slept in a makeshift shelter, but spent his days visiting people in hospitals, orphanages, and shelters. He said each encounter was a mission, and the greatest of all was to forgive. "Have you forgiven me?" I asked once. He chuckled softly. "I never needed to, Margaret, because I understood that hate is a burden that only hurts the one who carries it. I prefer to walk lightly." His humility disarmed me. I, who had spent my life judging, was now the one learning. Over time, the town began to call him the Angel of the River. He didn't like the nickname, but accepted it with a smile. Until one day, during one of these visits, an elderly woman recognized Henry. She burst into tears and hugged him tightly. "My God, it's you," she said. I was speechless until she added, "You saved my son in that fire in '97, remember?" I looked at him, surprised. He simply lowered his head, humbled. And it was in that moment that I realized Henry was hiding something much greater than his kindness. He carried a story the world had forgotten. An old pain, perhaps guilt, perhaps loss. When we returned home that night, I couldn't sleep. That revelation haunted me. Who was this man God had really placed in my path? And what had happened in that fire? The answers would come soon, but not before confronting me with something even more painful, the truth about Henry's past, and what he lost trying to save other lives. That night, when the wind blew harder and the sky seemed to split with thunder, something inside me told me the memories would come back. And they did. With the same intensity as the rain falling on my porch roof. I could still see the car sliding, the children's screams, the sound of the water engulfing everything. But now, there was more. A new truth that was beginning to emerge along with Henry's past. Days later, I received an unexpected phone call. It was the local sheriff, an old family friend. He told me that Henry had fainted on the street and was in the local hospital. "It wasn't serious," he assured me, "but it would be good if you came." I didn't think twice. I grabbed my coat and keys and headed out into the light drizzle that covered the road. When I arrived, he was awake, staring out the window, and 4 in his arm. He had the same calm expression as always, but his eyes, there was something different in them. A mix of exhaustion and secrecy. I sat down beside him. "You're always trying to save others, Henry. But who saves you?" I asked. He smirked. "I've been saved once, Margaret. It just took me a while to realize it." I wanted to insist, but he looked away. On the nightstand sat a yellowed, half-torn photo. In it, a younger man, Henry, held a laughing, curly-haired little girl in his arms. On the back was a blurry inscription, "To my hero, Daddy." My heart sank. "Is this your daughter?" I asked. He fell silent. The answer came after long seconds. It was. The word came out softly, almost like a whimper. Her name was Lucy. She was 7 years old. I didn't know what to say. He took a deep breath, his eyes welling up. That night of the fire, that was the same day I lost everything. I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. Henry, the man who had saved my family, had lost his own in a tragedy. He explained that he had worked as a firefighter for over 20 years. One winter night, an entire building caught fire downtown. He was on duty. He saved 5 people, but he couldn't get there in time to save Lucy and her wife. After that, I couldn't go home. I couldn't come back to myself, he said. I started walking the streets, helping whoever I could. It was the only way I could keep breathing. Those words pierced me like blades. All the prejudice, all the arrogance that had once blinded me, now shamed me even more. Henry wasn't a poor, aimless man. He was someone who had loved too much, lost everything, and yet still chose to love the world again. It was then that he looked at me and said something I never forgot. "Margaret, you think the accident was a punishment. But sometimes, God doesn't punish. He fixes. He breaks what needs to be remade." I fell silent. Outside, the sound of rain seemed to accompany our tears. Deep down, I knew that conversation was the beginning of something bigger. Henry wanted to tell me more, but his body was weak. The doctors asked me to let him rest. I left the room with a heavy heart, but one certainty: there was more to the story. The next day, when I returned to the hospital, the room was empty. The nurse said he'd been discharged that morning and left on his own, without saying where. "He just left this for you," she said, handing me a folded envelope. Inside was a letter. The handwriting was shaky but firm. "If you're reading this, it's because I had to go. There's something I need to fix before it's too late. Seek out Pastor Samuel at Riverside Church. He knows who I was, and who I can still be." My heart raced. Riverside was nearly 100 miles away, but I knew I had to go. Emily tried to stop me, worried. "Mom, you've just recovered from a terrible trauma. Let it go." But I couldn't. Something inside me was pushing me, as if God himself were telling me, "Go, the journey isn't over yet." I picked up the car the next day, the same car that had been pulled from the river and restored. With every mile I drove, the memory of the water returned. But now, along with the fear, there was purpose. I was searching for the truth. And perhaps, complete forgiveness. The road was wet, covered in a fine mist. In certain stretches, the sun tried to break through the clouds, and I could see its reflection in the puddles, as if the sky were telling me that light always returns, even after a storm. When I arrived in Riverside, I found the church. Small, simple, with open doors and the smell of old wood. Pastor Samuel was a soft-spoken man with eyes that seemed to read one's soul. When I mentioned Henry's name, he sighed deeply and motioned for me to sit. "Henry was a good man, but he carries a very heavy cross," he said. "He believed the fire was his fault. He tried to save everyone, but the fire was too fast. And since then, he sought redemption in every life he touches." I asked where he was. The pastor hesitated for a moment and then replied, "On the bridge." He went back there. I felt my whole body freeze. "Which bridge?" I asked. He looked at me seriously. "The same one where it all began for you." My heart raced. I ran to the car, started the engine, and drove off without looking back. The rain began to fall again, thin, insistent, as if the sky were repeating the scene from that night. Every kilometer seemed like an omen, and every clap of thunder a memory. When I reached the bridge, I saw his figure, standing in the middle of the road, facing the river, in the rain. His old coat was soaked, his arms open, as if he were talking to God. I shouted his name, but the wind carried my voice away. It was then that he took a step forward. And what happened next? I will never forget. I ran as fast as I could, screaming his name against the sound of the wind. The rain bit my face like 1,000 needles, and the river roared, loud as it had that night. Everything collapsed. I watched as Henry slipped. His body disappeared into the dark waters, swallowed within seconds. And for an instant, time seemed to stop again. Everything inside me froze, the fear, the pain, the guilt. I felt the same emptiness I'd felt when the car with my family sank. I screamed, but I couldn't hear my own voice. Only the roar of the river. I ran to the edge, without thinking, without hesitation. The cold hit me like a wall. I dove in. The current was strong, pulling me under, spinning me around as if the river had a life of its own. The darkness seemed endless. Underwater, the sound fades. Everything goes silent, as if the whole world were caught in a sigh. I opened my eyes. Everything was green, murky. I saw Henry's coat floating ahead, and I swam with all my might. I remembered the moment he dove for me. Now it was my turn. The bubbles rose slowly, and each second without air felt like an eternity. I felt my chest burn, my arms heavy, but I kept going. I touched his shoulder. He was unconscious. I grabbed his clothes and tried to pull him up. The weight was enormous, and the current insisted on carrying him away. That's when I saw something glinting nearby, a piece of metal stuck between the rocks. It was the same crucifix he wore around his neck. The chain was tangled, preventing him from climbing. I tried to free it, but the knot was strong. I pulled with all my strength, and when the metal broke, I felt a sharp pain in my arm, but I managed to free him. I climbed with him, gasping for air, my heart nearly bursting. When I emerged, the world seemed different. The air hurt my lungs. The rain beat down on my face. The wind pushed me toward the shore. With the help of a log and strength I didn't know I still had, I managed to drag him to the edge. Henry didn't move. His face was pale, his lips purple. I began massaging his chest, screaming his name. "Come on, Henry. Not now, not after all this." I squeezed, counted, prayed. Emily always told me that miracles happen when we believe until the last second. And that's what I did. I believed. Until, suddenly, he coughed. Once, twice. And opened his eyes. Relief made me cry like a child. He looked at me in confusion, and all I could say was, "Now it's my turn to save you." He smiled weakly and whispered, "No, Margaret. It's still God who does everything. We just lend a hand." We stood there, exhausted in the mud, as the river continued to roar. It was as if all of nature was watching that moment, as if heaven knew something had been restored. Not just his life, but my faith. Minutes later, Pastor Samuel came running. Someone from town had warned him about what was happening. He helped Henry up, covered him with his coat, and looked at me with teary eyes. "You did what you had to do, daughter. Now it's time for him to do what he has to do." I didn't quite understand what he meant until I heard Henry mumble, "I need to go back there, to that place." The pastor nodded, as if he already knew. "The building?" I asked. He nodded. My heart froze. The same building from the fire. The place where he'd lost everything. I tried to argue, but Henry grabbed my hand and said, "There's something I need closure on. A promise I made." The following days were eerily quiet. Henry recovered at church, and I visited him every day. Sometimes he would sit silently for hours, staring into space, murmuring prayers. Other times, he would write letters in an old notebook. I didn't know what he planned, but I saw in his eyes the serenity of someone who has finally found purpose. One night he told me, "In that fire, there was a woman I couldn't save. She was holding a child. I never knew their names, but I dreamed about them for years. And in the dream, they told me, 'It's not over yet.'" He paused, took a deep breath, and continued, "Last week, the pastor showed me an old record. There was a name on the list of victims who survived, the woman. She lives in a nearby town. I need to find her. I need to hear from her that they were okay." I realized this was the closure Henry had been waiting for so long. And deep down, I knew this quest would lead him back to the fire of the past. Not the literal one, but the one of the soul. "I'll go with you," I said. He tried to refuse, but I insisted. God doesn't put people in our path by accident. I was lost when you found me. Now it's my turn to walk by your side. He smiled. "Then let's go together." That night, the wind died down. The river, which had previously seemed to roar, became calm. It was as if the water, too, had calmed down, as if everything had finally calmed down. But deep down, I knew, the true climax was yet to come. And when Henry's past came to light, I would discover that the fire that destroyed him also held a connection to my own story. A connection that would change everything I thought I knew about fate, faith, and forgiveness. The road leading to the town where Henry believed the survivor lived was long, surrounded by golden fields and distant mountains. The air smelled of wet earth and spring, and with every mile I traveled, I felt as if fate were guiding us towards something beyond human understanding. Henry seemed at peace. I was anxious, unsure if I was ready to hear what his past would reveal. Along the way, he told me he'd had a recurring dream over the past few days. In it, he saw a woman in a blue dress standing on the banks of a river, waving to him and smiling. I don't know who she is, Margaret, but when I wake up, I feel a warmth in my chest. It's as if God is telling me, it's time to go home. I didn't want to interrupt, but something about that dream gave me chills, because I'd also seen this woman in dreams when I was a girl. We arrived at the small village at dusk. The sky was copper-colored, and the sun was setting behind the hills. We stopped in front of a simple house surrounded by rose bushes. A gray-haired woman swept the porch. Henry got out of the car slowly, hesitantly. When she saw him, she put down the broom. The two stood there, staring at each other, as if time had stopped. "Henry," she said, her voice trembling. He nodded. "It's me, ma'am." She brought her hands to her face, crying, "My God, you're alive." I watched the scene, not quite understanding, until she added, "You pulled me out of the fire. I never knew your name. I never got to thank you." Henry fell to his knees. "And the girl? That little girl with you?" The woman cried harder. "She survived. She was my niece. She's still alive today." It was as if the entire sky opened up. Henry looked up, his eyes filling with tears. "So that was it. That was why I was still here." I'd never seen anyone cry like that, with gratitude, regret, and peace all mixed together in one breath. The woman took him inside and told us what she remembered: the fire, the panic, the unbearable heat. Henry had broken the window with his shoulder, pushed them both out, and then passed out. When the firefighters found him, he was already unconscious. He was presumed dead for a few minutes. "But God gave you back to us," she said, holding his hands. That sentence kept vibrating inside me. God gave you back, and in that moment, I realized something that chilled me to the core. Henry hadn't just saved us at the river. He had been sent back, literally, to complete a mission heaven hadn't yet completed. When we left the house, the sun had already set, and the air was chilly. We walked to the riverbank that ran nearby, the same river that ran through the village. Henry stopped and looked at the calm, flowing water. "You know what's funny," he said. "That river starts back there, near your town. It's the same stream that brought me to you." I was silent. The same river. The same man. The same God, connecting two seemingly distant stories. It couldn't be a coincidence. It was a miracle. Henry knelt, touched the water, and began to pray. I stood beside him, and together, amid the gentle sound of the current, we felt something different, a presence that couldn't be explained, only felt. The wind stopped, the trees stood still, and the air seemed charged with light. "Lord," he whispered, "if there is still something for me to do in this world, show me the way. But if my mission is finished, may my soul find rest." I'll never forget what happened next. The river water began to shimmer beneath the moon, as if reflecting 1,000 stars. A beam of light illuminated Henry's face, and for an instant, I swear I saw him differently, younger, serene, as if time had turned back. His face lit up with a peace that was not of this world. I shivered. "Henry, are you seeing this?" He looked at me and smiled. "Yes. But don't be afraid. Sometimes, when the sky wants to speak, even the water answers." We stood there for minutes that seemed like eternity, until the light faded. The river returned to normal, the wind blew again, and the world resumed its usual sound. But something inside us had changed. We drove back to the city in the silence of the early morning. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. Henry slept in the passenger seat, the broken crucifix hanging around his neck. I looked at him and knew, God had just shown us that forgiveness and purpose go hand in hand. The next morning, Henry woke up weaker. "I'm tired, Margaret," he said with a calm smile. "But not sad. I think the river has already taken me where I needed to go." I tried to convince him to see a doctor, but he only replied, "The body can rest. The spirit, that's already at peace." Hours later, as the evening light streamed through the church window, Henry slowly rose, walked to the altar, knelt, and closed his eyes. I stood behind him, praying silently. It was then that I noticed, the same soft glow from the night before enveloped his face. And in the next instant, a light wind blew through the church, extinguishing the candles. I called out to him. He didn't answer. Henry stood still, serene, smiling. I cried, but not out of sadness. It was different. It was as if I knew he had finally come home. The river brought him, and the river took him, from the world of the living to eternity. And it was in that sacred silence that I understood the true miracle. God doesn't just save us from death, He saves us from ourselves. And through a simple man, a homeless man, He restored not only my family, but also my faith. But fate still held one last revelation, something Henry had written down, and it would change everything I believed about why our paths had crossed. The morning after Henry's passing, the whole town seemed quieter. The sun rose shyly, and the sound of church bells echoed over the hills with a beautiful melancholy, the kind that pains and comforts at the same time. I sat in the front pew, staring at the altar where he had prayed for the last time. His crucifix was still there, hanging in the corner of the wood, its string broken. Pastor Samuel approached slowly, holding an aged envelope. "He left this for you, Margaret." My hands shook as I took it. The paper was rough, and the name written in black ink looked as if it had been carefully traced, for those who God sent to find the way with me. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a letter and a small, folded map. The text began in the same shaky handwriting I already recognized. "If you're reading this, it's because I've finally learned to rest. But there's something that still needs to be done, something I couldn't accomplish in life. Within this map is a place, Margaret. A shelter I started building years ago, before I got lost on the streets. I wanted it to be a refuge for those who have no one. But grief stopped me in my tracks. Finish what I started. And when you do, tell them the river doesn't sink anyone, it teaches them how to swim." I closed my eyes. The letter trembled between my fingers. It was as if I could hear his voice saying those words right there, beside me. The map indicated a small clearing on the banks of the same river where everything had happened. I drove there that same day, with Emily and the children. The road was narrow, the ground dirt, and the sound of the river accompanied the car like an old song. When we arrived, I found the foundations of an unfinished building. Wooden pillars, a fallen cross, and an old plaque leaning against the ground with the name he had chosen, House of Hope. Grace, my granddaughter, ran up to me and asked, "Grandma, is this where the river boy lived?" I took a deep breath and replied, "This is where he wanted others to live, dear." I knelt on the wet earth and touched the foundation. I felt a force course through me, as if Henry were there, guiding me. And then, without planning, without thinking, I decided I would finish the shelter. It was the least I could do for this man who had given me back everything I thought I had lost: my faith, my humanity, and my family. The following days were a race against time. I sold my car, furnished friends, spoke with local business owners and even the city council. Each stone placed there seemed to heal a part of my heart. Emily organized the volunteers. Oliver and Grace painted the walls by hand. Little by little, the place took shape, and with it, a new purpose was born within me. But amidst the construction, an event deeply moved me. One of the volunteers, a simple man named Thomas, showed me an old photo he'd found among the papers Henry had left at the church. In the image, he was younger, wearing a firefighter's uniform, standing next to a group of men. In the corner of the photo, there was a woman, and, to my astonishment, I recognized her. It was my sister, Helen. The shock took my breath away. I stood there, staring at the photo as if time had played a trick on me. Helen had died over 30 years ago, in a fire while living in another city, the same fire that had taken Henry's wife and daughter. My body shuddered. "My God!" I whispered. It was her. I ran to Pastor Samuel, desperate. "Is this possible?" He looked at the photo calmly and nodded. "I think you understand now, Margaret. God brought you, Henry, because you were connected from the beginning. The same fire that wounded him also marked you. He saved your sister." I was floored. Everything I thought I knew about destiny crumbled before me. Henry had risked his life to save the woman who once taught me the greatest lesson in love I've ever known. And decades later, God put him back in my path, to save me too. The weight of the revelation brought me to my knees. I cried so hard I could barely breathe. "He never knew who she was," I whispered. The pastor touched my shoulder. Maybe he didn't need to know. God already knew. In the days that followed, I worked even harder. Every hammer blow, every wall built, was a silent prayer. House of Hope grew like a living blessing, and people began to show up from everywhere. Single mothers, war veterans, homeless youth. None of them knew the story behind the shelter, but they all felt something different there, a peace indescribable. On the day of the inauguration, the sky was clear, and the river flowed calmly. I placed the old restored plaque at the entrance, bearing Henry's chosen name. And just below, I added a phrase engraved in bronze. In memory of those who dove to save and taught the world to love. As the ribbon was cut, the wind blew hard, making the leaves dance. For a moment, I smelled the rain mixed with something familiar, the scent of Henry's old coat. I looked at the river and swear I saw the reflection of a man smiling in the water. It was then that I realized, his fight against time was not in vain. Love, when it's true, never drowns. It simply changes form, spans generations, and continues to save lives, one soul at a time. But fate still held one last secret. Among the things Henry had left at the church was one more envelope, sealed with wax and addressed to me. The pastor would only deliver it when the shelter was complete. And inside that letter, I would discover the most unexpected truth of all. The morning after the inauguration of Casa de Esperanza, the sun seemed different, warm but serene, as if the sky itself were smiling. The city was still buzzing about the previous night's event. People who had never met embraced, prayed together, and many said they felt something sacred in that place. I felt it too. But inside me, something still weighed heavily. The envelope Pastor Samuel would give me that day had been keeping me awake ever since I heard about it. I arrived at the church just before 9. The smell of wood and melted wax enveloped me as soon as I entered. Candles flickered on the altar, and the sound of a children's choir echoed softly from an old radio. The pastor sat in the front pew, holding the sealed envelope. When he saw me, he slowly stood up. "Margaret," Henry asked that this be delivered only when the shelter was ready. "I think the time has come." My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The wax seal bore the same symbol engraved on his crucifix, a small fish, a symbol of the early Christians. The pastor looked me in the eye. "He knew this letter would change something in you." I took a deep breath and opened it. Inside were several pages, handwritten in a firm handwriting. The first few lines read, "Dear Margaret, if you're reading this, it's because you kept your promise. I knew you would, because God never makes mistakes when choosing who He puts in our path. But there's something I need to tell you, something I hid not out of fear, but out of love." My heart raced. I continued reading. The night of the fire, many faces passed before me. But one of them never left my mind. A woman screaming her sister's name. I pulled her out of the building as the roof was already falling, and before she passed out, she handed me a necklace. She said, "Please give this to my family if I don't make it out alive." I kept that necklace with me all these years. I didn't know who to look for, until the day I saw you, stopped at the traffic light. My hands began to sweat. My throat went dry. The world around me seemed to disappear. When I saw you that day, I recognized the look in your eyes. The same look in hers. I didn't know how to say it. So I prayed to God to show me if it was really you. And He did, not in the way we expected, but in the way He knew would unite us forever. The tears fell before I could stop them. I looked at the pastor, speechless, and he just nodded, indicating for me to continue. "The necklace is with this letter. I never had the courage to give it to you. Now it's yours, back to the family of the person who saved me first." I searched inside the envelope. There it was. A small, time-worn, heart-shaped gold pendant. I recognized it instantly. It was the necklace my sister Helen had worn since she was 16, the one she never took off, not even to sleep. I knelt on the church floor and wept like a girl. Every memory, every loss, every tear in my life seemed to have led me to that moment. Henry had carried my family's symbol for decades, unaware that it belonged to the woman he would later save. The circle was closing, perfect, divine, impossible to be coincidental. The pastor placed his hand on my shoulder. "Now you understand, Margaret. The river, the fire, the encounter. Everything was connected. God weaves stories together with threads we can't see. I stood there, silent, for a long time. I thought about how many times I'd blamed God for my pain, not realizing that, even in tragedies, He worked to transform everything into redemption. I thought about Henry, his life of sacrifice and faith. And for the first time, I felt the weight of guilt dissolve within me. I returned to Casa de Esperanza that afternoon. Children played in the garden, women smiled, and men who had previously slept on the streets helped in the garden. There was joy in every corner. I took the necklace, attached it to a small wooden cross in the center of the shelter, and whispered, "We are all home now." Emily hugged me from behind. "Mom, you feel light." I smiled, wiping away my tears. "It's because I finally understand, daughter. Guilt doesn't set us free. Forgiveness does." But that night, as I was closing the shelter doors, something caught my attention. The wind blew hard, and one of the windows slammed shut, knocking an old photograph off the wall, the first one we'd put up there on opening day. When I picked it up, I noticed something I'd never noticed before. In the reflection of the water in the background, behind us all, was the silhouette of a man. Hat, coat, and that same serene smile. My heart stopped for a moment. I looked again, closer. There was no doubt. It was him. Henry. That was the last sign that he was still there, caring, guiding, living in every soul that shelter would save. And that very night, as the wind blew gently over the river, I knew the cycle of pain had ended. But the cycle of love had just begun. The days passed, and the shelter thrived. It was as if the House of Hope had a heart that beat to the rhythm of the prayers said there. Every face that walked through those doors brought a story, pain, loss, overcoming, and somehow everyone left transformed. I felt at peace, but there was something that still kept me awake. Helen's necklace. It seemed to pulse in my hands every time I held it, as if it still had something to say. One night, after dinner at the shelter, I sat alone in the small office we'd set up. The rain fell outside, softly, like a distant memory. I picked up the necklace, looked at it, and thought of Henry. That's when I noticed something I'd never noticed before. The pendant could be opened. It was a small keepsake box, and inside was a tiny photo, nearly faded by time. My eyes could hardly believe what I saw. The photo showed two little girls, Helen and Eu. I gasped. It was a photo taken before she moved, still in my parents' old backyard. But what shocked me was what was written on the back, in delicate handwriting. "If anything happens to me, look for Henry Thompson. He knows the truth about our father." My entire body froze. I trembled. Why would Helen have written this? What did Henry have to do with our father? He never mentioned anything, not even in the most intimate moments of conversation. It was possible. No, it couldn't be. But my heart already knew. I ran to the office closet where we kept the documents Henry had left. Among the notebooks and papers, I found a folder with the name Thompson Family. Inside were old certificates, yellowed photos, and newspaper clippings. One of them bore the title, "Tragic House Fire, Hero Firefighter Saves Lives, but Loses Family." Below was a photo of a young Henry, standing next to a woman and a child. But behind the photo, held together with a rusty paperclip, was a folded piece of paper, a birth certificate. Father's name, Arthur James Thompson. Mother's name, Clara Louise Miller. Son's name, Henry Arthur Thompson. And just below, an attachment, another certificate, old, with the same father's name, but another mother, Clara Miller. I felt my legs weaken. Clara Miller. That was my mother's name. I dropped the paper. The world spun. The air vanished. Henry was my brother. A gasp tore from my throat. The pieces began to fall into place. The way he looked at me, the serenity I felt beside him, the inexplicable bond we'd felt since our first meeting. It wasn't coincidence. It was blood. It was destiny. I cried. I cried like I'd never cried before. I'd spent years ignoring the man the world called nobody, unaware that he was my own flesh and blood, the brother my mother had before she met my father, the son she'd been forced to give up because she couldn't raise him. A secret she took to her grave. Grief mingled with shock, guilt, and a new love that blossomed, even after his death. Pastor Samuel, seeing me in that condition, ran to me. I could barely speak. I just pointed to the papers. He read them silently, then sighed deeply. Now it all makes sense. Why God brought you together. That night, I returned to the river. The same bank where Henry had saved me. I took the necklace and the 2 birth certificates with me. The moon reflected off the water like a silver mirror. I sat and let the memories wash over me. My childhood with Helen, the pain of the accident, Henry's first glimpse at the traffic light. I spoke to myself, but I was certain he could hear me. My brother, you saved me without knowing who I was. You taught me what love, faith, and forgiveness are. And now I understand. God didn't just want you to save me from death. He wanted me to recognize you as a part of me. Tears fell into the river, mingling with the current. I picked up the necklace, unhooked the pendant, and let it glide into the water. It glowed for a moment before disappearing into the depths. Suddenly, the wind blew hard, lifting leaves and making the trees sing. A small wave crashed against the shore, and for a second, I swear I saw his reflection again, Henry, smiling. The pastor approached slowly, carrying a flashlight. Margaret, are you ready to tell this story to the world? I nodded. Yes. People need to know that God's love is so deep it can span rivers, fires, and generations. And that very night, I decided the shelter would have a new name. I wrote in gold paint on the old wooden sign, House of Hope, established in memory of Henry Thompson, my brother. The pastor read it silently and wept. You've completed the cycle, daughter. I smiled. No, pastor. The cycle only begins when we understand the purpose. As we left the river, the sky was brightening. The sun was rising slowly, gilding the water, and for a moment, I thought I heard a voice on the wind, soft and familiar. The river doesn't sink anyone. It teaches you how to swim. The truth was revealed. And with it, my soul finally found rest. But there was still one last step missing, the most important of all, teaching the world what forgiveness is capable of when born of true love. The morning the sun first touched the roof of Casa de Esperanza, I felt something different in the air. It wasn't just the light, it was a presence. The kind of calm you only feel when you finally understand you're in the right place at the right time. The river flowed gently, the birds sang, and the wind seemed to carry a sweet murmur, as if Henry were still there, guiding my every step. The shelter was now full. Entire families had found refuge within its walls. Children who had lived on the streets played in the garden, and elderly people who had previously slept outside now drank hot coffee at sunrise. Everything functioned like a beating heart of faith and love. And every corner of that place told a story. His, mine, and God's. A reporter from a local station came to report on the shelter. They say miracles happen here, is that true? He asked, adjusting the camera. I smiled, looking out at the river. Yes, but not the kind the world usually expects. A miracle is when someone lost finds their way back to themselves. During the interview, I told him about Henry. I spoke of the man many called a beggar, but who was actually an angel disguised as an ordinary human being. I spoke of the rescue, the fire, the faith, and finally, the discovery, the blood-soaked truth that united us. The reporter, visibly moved, turned off the camera and said, "This story will change lives." I just smiled. It's already changed mine. In the months that followed, Casa de Esperanza became a symbol. Churches, schools, and volunteers from other cities came to help. Emily took over running the shelter with me, and my grandchildren, Oliver and Grace, grew up believing that every act of kindness is a seed planted in heaven. But there was one moment in particular that I'll never forget. One rainy afternoon, an elderly woman arrived at the gate. She wore a blue scarf in her hair and carried a small suitcase. She said she wanted to see the place of the riverman. When I led her into the main hall, she stopped before the cross where I'd hung Helen's necklace. She touched the pendant and wept. "I knew him many years ago," she whispered. "He saved my son from the fire. I never knew his name until today." We embraced, two strangers united by the same miracle. And in that moment, I realized that Henry's legacy lived on, multiplied, alive, eternal. As time passed, I began writing a book about our history. Not for myself, but for those who still doubt that God speaks through ordinary people, through chance events, through rivers, and through pain. Title: The River Sinks No One. Because that's what he always said. In the last pages, I wrote, "He saved me from the water, but what truly saved me was love. Henry didn't teach me how to survive, he taught me how to live. And now, every life welcomed into this shelter is a ripple born from the same river that once brought us together." On the first anniversary of Casa de Esperanza, we held a ceremony by the river. The sun was setting, and the golden light painted everything orange. I spoke about forgiveness, about faith, about new beginnings. When I finished, the wind blew hard, lifting the leaves and making the water sparkle. Oliver pointed and shouted, "Look, Grandma, the river boy!" Everyone looked. And there, for a brief moment, in the reflection of the sunset, he was, the serene smile, the worn hat, the peaceful look. Then the reflection faded, and the river returned to its course. Emily hugged me. "Did you see?" I smiled, my eyes watering. "Yes. And I know he saw us too." That night, before I went to sleep, I opened my Bible to the page Henry often quoted, Isaiah 43 verse 2. "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they will not overflow you." I closed the book and whispered one last prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for showing me that true love never dies. It keeps flowing, like a river, eternal and serene." And so, under the soft moonlight, I realized that the end of that story wasn't really the end. It was just the beginning of a chain that would never stop. Because when God decides to intertwine destinies, even what seemed like tragedy becomes salvation. And the river, that same river that had once almost swept us away, was now living testimony that miracles exist. You know, after all, I learned that God writes the most beautiful stories precisely with the lines we thought were too crooked to fix. What seemed like punishment was actually a calling. What I saw as loss was purpose. Henry, that man the world saw as nothing else, was the instrument heaven chose to remind me of true love. Today, when I walk through Casa de Esperanza and hear the children's laughter, I feel like every sound is a living prayer. The river flows outside, and the sound of the water brings me peace. Sometimes I stop on the porch, look at the horizon, and think, if God was capable of transforming a tragedy into a miracle, what else is he capable of, if we just trust? And that's why I want to ask you, have you ever experienced something that seemed like the end, but then realized it was just the beginning of something bigger? Have you ever felt God pulling you back to the surface when all seemed lost? Think about it. Maybe your river is still teaching you how to swim. Maybe your Henry has already crossed your path and you didn't even notice. Sometimes, the angel we pray for doesn't come from heaven, it comes from the street, from a look, from pain. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Faith multiplies when we share. And if you want to continue hearing stories like this, full of purpose and emotion, I warmly invite you to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, each story is a seed that God plants in the hearts of those who listen. May the Lord bless you with health, peace, joy, and a love as deep as the river that never stops flowing. May He show you that even when the waters seem to be sweeping you away, it's because He's carrying you to a new beginning. And remember, the river doesn't sink anyone. It teaches us how to live.